I'm Mike Hebert, owner of Cantex Roofing and Construction. Every day is game day, and we'll get it right when it comes to your roofing, construction, windows, and mirrors. Call Cantex Roofing and Construction today. Together, we are one serving you.
The podcast that finishes your workday in a very Red Raider way. This is the Tech Talk Podcast from Double T 97.3, presented by Cantex Roofing and Construction.
Hey there, how you going? It's Tech Talk on Double T 97.3 and Double T 97.3.com. With Paul, I'm Aaron. Would love to hear your thoughts and comments on the Yates Flooring Center chat line. You can weigh in at Double T 97.3.com or through the Double T 97.3 mobile app presented by Happy State Bank. Minnesota has gone up on Bowling Green 16-10, 9:20 left to play in the second half. We have coverage of that, play-by-play coverage of that, over on 100.7 the score. These games are interesting, at least to me, and I realize that I'm kind of a junkie here, because it means a lot to Bowling Green, right? In any
absolutely.
of those MAC programs, an opportunity to beat a Big Ten team, that makes for a pretty special, potentially 8-5 season, for example. Whereas Minnesota at 5-7, by all rights, shouldn't be in a bowl game. And this is more about them not losing than it is winning.
It really is. It really is. And 5-7. That's a brutal draw, anyways. It kind of goes back to, and we talk about this a lot, covering high school football. Is what do you do in a playoff scenario? You've got 4 schools that make it in. Are you excited that 4th seed you end up playing the number 1 seed from another district that's probably ranked in the top 15 in the state, and that can be brutal. And you got a 5-7 team, obviously, nowhere near even the middle of the road for the big, and just ugly.
I would I would really hate. There are a number of programs that I feel this way about right now. I would really hate to be a Minnesota fan right now.
Mm-hmm.
I think they're screwed.
Yeah,
because listen. PJ Fleck has done a pretty good job there, right? 11-2, 9-4, 9-4, 5-7 this year on pace right now. Still early though, to go 6-7. So 4 straight bowl games, which is nothing to sniff at, right? I'm not dogging that job. His issue is, and Minnesota's issue is, they've been doing all this in the Big Ten West, right?
Yeah.
A terrible division. It's Big 12 North-esque.
Yes.
For us, Tech fans. And they haven't really, I don't think, changed the paradigm of the program. Like recruiting wise, they're still kind of fishing in those same waters. Their classes still largely rank about the same, somewhere between mid 30s to the 50s, and that'll hunt in the Big Ten West when you get to play Nebraska,
right? And
all the other Northwestern and et cetera, et cetera. Yeah. When the biggest dog on the block is Iowa.
Yeah.
Right?
You might be in some trouble there.
But now it's opened up. There are no divisions starting next year in the Big Ten. You're adding in USC, you're adding in UCLA, Oregon, Washington. You're not going to be benefiting from an easy schedule. And, your exposure will probably be limited as a result. Maybe more Big Ten games. And so I just don't know, wow, that was a wicked hit. Whew. Clean, but wicked.
Yeah.
I just don't know where they go. What's the best case scenario? If you were a Minnesota fan over the last 4 years, you could have realistically woken up in the preseason going, we could contend for a division championship. That's within grasp.
For sure.
What's that now?
Nothing. I mean, that was a wicked hit. Yikes. And it was right there at the border, too. It was so close, within about a step of being a little bit of a late hit out of bounds. But, man, that was clean. That's what you got to do. No, I think that's exactly where they've found themselves in a very precarious situation that I don't know if there's a – I mean, do you just sit there and, accept mediocrity and know that that's probably going to be your lot in life moving forward, and you'll never aspire to anything greater. Because once they do away with those divisions, I mean, that's truly where you're going to be, because that USC is going to compete for those kids that obviously are very talented. You're going to have your Oregon and your Washington, who have both had, Washington being in the college football playoff this year. And then, and in Michigan, it's in the college football. There's too many obstacles there. So I think you kind of missed your window.
This is who they play next year. Actually, we'll compare and contrast. It's a 3-hour show.
It is.
This year, they played... This is actually a pretty tough schedule, right? They played Nebraska, Eastern Michigan. They played at North Carolina. They played at Northwestern. They had a home game against Louisiana Lafayette. They hosted Michigan. They played at Iowa. They hosted Michigan State. They hosted Illinois, at Purdue, at Ohio State, Wisconsin at home. Next year, they play North Carolina again, this time at home. Rhode Island and Nevada, also at home. They host Iowa. They play at Michigan. They host USC. They play at UCLA. Maryland, Illinois on the road, Rutgers on the road, Penn State, Wisconsin. And that's just next year. It's going to get just...
Yeah.
And again, it would be different if they had taken advantage of their on-field success and parlayed that into some increased success in recruiting.
Exactly.
But they haven't done that.
Yeah.
It's super frustrating, I would guess. And listen, you should still try to compete. I'm not saying that they should just
just roll over and die.
Chuck out.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, absolutely not. I'm just saying it's going to be a shock, I think, to them and fan bases of other teams as well, where you can't really count on 3 wins here or there from just playing a bunch of bottom feeders in your division. I wonder if Wisconsin is going to kind of feel that too. I was not just especially impressed with them in year 1 under Luke Fickell.
And that's a program that has a history of success, so it's not like it's foreign to them in any way, shape, or form. But
it's interesting that what Wisconsin had that I was very jealous of in a way was an identity, right? Whether it was under Christ or just name their coaches before Fickell. Even Gary Anderson, they were going to run smash mouth Big Ten traditional football, and they would be successful. It wouldn't be ugly like Iowa.
Yeah.
And then they went away with that with Luke Fickell, and I don't know how you're going to beat the Oregons and the Washingtons and the USCs and the Ohio States and the Penn States by running a spread offense that they run too. Yeah.
Well, you saw historically what happened with Nebraska over time when you got away from that, and how Callahan just completely dismantled an identity for a football program moving forward, and they have really never recovered since then. And that was the black shirts and the running the ball and everything that Osborne had established over the course of time, that it struck fear in people. It really did. And it was intimidating when you went on the field. I was over in this stadium right across the street here and watched the beatdowns on the hands of the Huskers. So yeah, to lose that kind of personality and that kind of demeanor, it does a lot to a program. And you may never get it back. You may not. I would hope, just for the prideful aspect of it for an organization or for a university or program like that you would do everything in your power to get some of that mantra back that you had, that machismo that kind of put you in a position of power for so long. But who knows? That's these days, success can be fleeting,
sure.
And we're seeing it on pretty much every level of competition in athletics.
It's not super hard to get good. It's extremely hard to stay good.
Yep.
More Tech Talk next.
The podcast put together with Red Raider fans in mind. This is the Tech Talk Podcast from Double T 97.3, presented by Cantex Roofing and Construction.
Hi, how are you? Good afternoon. It's Tech Talk on Double T 97.3 and Double T 97.3.com with Paul. I'm Aaron. Love to hear what you have to say on the Yates Flooring Center chat line at Double T 97.3.com. This person says on the chat line, Florida State, North Carolina, NC State, and Clemson to the Big 12. I guess that's a prediction. Certainly has not been reported. Would you be happy with that, Paul?
I don't know. I kind of figured with any fallout that we have from the ACC that Virginia Tech might be a possibility. North Carolina State might be a possibility. Those are ones that I would immediately look at. I don't know if Clemson would fall in there. It just always seemed like the demise of the ACC would lead to FSU and Clemson going to the SEC in some way, shape, or form. And I know that there have been incredibly low-key about that, saying, oh, no, we're not interested in expanding beyond this. But let's be honest. I mean, they were more than ecstatic to have Texas and Oklahoma join them.
Sure.
And both of those teams, in my mind, still with Florida State and Clemson are brands, and they would be crazy not to include those. Travel-wise, that's another thing that really checks a box. You're really kind of situated in a good position there to limit some of that travel. Because I think when you see what's going on with the Big 12 and what's going on with the Big 10, there's going to be so much travel involved. It's one thing if you're talking about your football program, but if you're talking about, or your soccer program for that matter, but if you're talking about basketball, if you're talking about baseball, softball, things that you play multiple games over the course of a season, you have all that has to come into play in some way, shape, or form. And if you can kind of limit that, it makes a whole lot of sense to have those.
Yeah, I mean, I would be shocked if at the end of the day, whether this happens in the next 3 years or in the mid-2030s, if Florida State and North Carolina and Clemson end up in the Big 12. And really, North Carolina is the prize here. Yeah. I mean, Florida State and Clemson are gigantic. Well, not gigantic. They're very big football brands. They're the most attractive football brands outside of the Big Ten and the SEC. Beginning July 1, 2024. It's not especially close. But North Carolina is still head and shoulders the prize. North Carolina basketball is the biggest brand, period, outside of the Big Ten and the SEC. They are in a contiguous state for both the Big Ten, close, not quite, but especially the SEC. Mm-hmm. If the Big Ten adds Virginia, then it would be a contiguous state.
You bet.
Either way, it would not be some massive travel outpost like Florida State would be. Right. Like Oregon and Washington and USC and UCLA are. Academically, it fits, and the Big Ten typically, walks that talk, that walk when it comes to caring about academics. It's a new market for both conferences, and it's in the South, which is population is growing in the South. It's declining in California. It's declining in the Midwest. That's the prize. Florida State is like blazing this trail in order to be the third choice, right? The second or the third choice. It's really, really odd, honestly. They're taking all these bullets, all this heat, all these angry looks, these lawsuits. They're paying all these lawyers to kind of figure out these answers, and all that for North Carolina to jump them in line. Will the Big 12 get some leftovers if things settle into a three-conference model? Absolutely. Do I think that Florida State, North Carolina, and Clemson will be involved in that? No, absolutely not.
No, I don't think that either. But as I mentioned, I think the more likely choice would be North Carolina State out of that mess. But yeah, North Carolina, you've built a brand with basketball. You've established yourself, or kind of reestablished yourself, as a football team that can play.
Sure.
That they can play a lot of other sports too. Baseball's been strong. You've been able to demonstrate your wherewithal on the college landscape in a lot of different ways. So yeah, I'd say North Carolina definitely would be the prize in there, just because they have a lot of means. And it's not to shortchange anything Florida State does. And Florida State baseball, excellent baseball program. We know that firsthand. But yeah, when it does kind of, when the rubber, hits the road, I would say probably North Carolina.
And then the other thing about Florida State is too, the Big Ten and the SEC are not desperate, right?
No, neither one are.
They are in a great situation. Florida State joining their league does not make or break anything. It is a margin. It was a marginal addition if they make it. If you're in the SEC, if you're a decision maker, if you're a university CEO in the SEC or the Big Ten, and seeing how they're acting, and like president, regents, boosters, everyone, how they're acting toward their league partners right now, it doesn't make you excited to add them, right? Because if they do that now, they're liable to do it again in the future. So I think Florida State is misplaying this in a big way. I think that they could probably challenge the grant of rights without being so, hostile about it.
Demonstrative. I don't know.
I mean, they've been bleep talking the ACC for 18 months.
Yeah, they have. And part of it I know goes back to the ACC's decision to add the likes of Stanford and Cal and SMU and including having people not take any money to join the league. I know that was kind of what kind of value are any of those brands adding to that conference, and that's been one of their sticking points. I get it. I definitely get it.
That's a pyramid scheme.
Yeah, it really is at that point.
Yeah,
it really is.
Yeah, I mean, it'll be curious to kind of see what happens over the next 18 months there. I think more broadly, as we move into the next decade, I wonder if it's going to skip a step, right? Mm-hmm. If Florida State is successful and they're able to get out of their grant of rights, does that just we go from 5 to 3 in the matter of 36 months, or does that hasten we just can't keep doing this. Let's just blow this up and figure something else out. And if that's the case, what happens then, right? Because we haven't seen, at least in a power conference perspective, teams get kicked out, right? Vanderbilt still cashing those checks. Indiana, Purdue still cashing those checks, right? What happens in a Power 2 scenario or a super conference, I'm using air quotes here,
right,
scenario, when Indiana has as many power conference teams as California, right, or Texas? That's not going to fly, dude.
No.
Like, I don't care how long they've been in the Big Ten. I don't care how long the 2 Mississippi schools have been in the SEC. At that point, when you start playing with college football to that degree, the politicians start getting involved, and
they already are.
You are insane. They already are in a much bigger degree.
You bet.
You're insane if you think that Indiana is going to have as many power conference teams when all the dust settles in football as Texas and California. You're insane. More Tech Talk next.
The podcast put together with Red Raider fans in mind. This is the Tech Talk Podcast from Double T 97.3, presented by Cantex Roofing and Construction.
Hi there, how you going? Happy Tuesday. It's Tech Talk on Double T 97.3 and Double T 97.3.com with Paul Tubbs. I'm Aaron Dickens. Love to hear what you have to say on the Yates Flooring Center chat line at Double T 97.3.com. We're currently enjoying the First Responders Bowl right now that you can hear live on 100.7 The Score. We're watching it on ESPN. Bobcats up 7-0 right now of Texas State over Rice 11:48 to go in the first quarter. So to continue our conversation from the previous segment, who would you put first in a Big 12 preseason?
Based on what I've seen, at least at the end of the season, I might put Arizona at the top, to be quite honest. And I would probably put Oklahoma State 2. I'd probably put Tech 3.
Are you surprised at how low you have Utah? Like, would August, Paul, be surprised at how low December, Paul?
Absolutely. I mean, and especially after all the talk we heard on every social media platform, the denial about Utah actually moving into the Big 12 in the first place. And then once that whole acceptance had hit their fan base, that they were just going to roll in here and just, we're going to own the Big 12. You can't even beat Northwestern. No. and you had so many kids that left that were in the transfer portal. I'm not real impressed with their incoming class, to be quite honest. So it is shocking to me because they had been, and maybe it was just the falsehood, that we were talking about with Kansas State, where you had a little bit of, this thought in the back of your mind, they're the unbeatable force, the mighty this. And maybe it was just the falsehood that was the Pac for so many years. And you were successful as a Utah program in quite possibly one of the worst time frames for that conference as far as strength. And it showed. I mean, your last chance to leave a lasting impression on people, and you absolutely lay an egg.
It does seem like this new Big 12, Big 12 3.0, whatever you want to call it, there are a lot of programs, and they've done this, like they've had success doing this, so this isn't some kind of like theory, but it's tough to do this year in, year out over a long period of time. But you do have a lot of programs that are making more with less, right? To kind of go on your commentary about Utah's class. I mean, I think 8 of the 14 teams in the conference right now, and I'm guessing that 8 to 10 of the 16 that will be in it starting next year, their average star rating for their incoming class is below 3. Right? It's 2 point something. I mean, Oklahoma State, I think 2.67. Kansas State, same thing, I think. And so there's a real opportunity here, and hopefully it's Texas Tech.
Yeah.
For a program or a small number of programs to really distance themselves from the rest of the pack in terms of high-level recruiting and then also developing and utilizing those players properly.
You bet.
Right? Because if you can go into most conference games with an advantage in talent, right? Doesn't mean you're going to win the game.
No.
Look at Texas for most of the last decade. But it certainly raises your floor, right? It increases your margin for error. And it'd be great if one of those programs was Tech.
Well, and just to kind of emphasize that point, you look at the difference between 1s and 2s on a squad, how much depth that you have. What's the drop-off between your 1s and 2s? I think you saw an excellent example of this when Tech played Texas this year, and you had so many guys that were injured. The drop-off in experience from 1s and 2s was significant, and it showed. Texas really didn't have any mass injuries on their team, but the drop-off from their 1s to 2s to 3s and 4s, for that matter, is significant. There's a reason why there are, I don't know how many players in the portal for Georgia right now that are 4- and 5-star rated kids, because they have that kind of depth. There is not a drop-off between 1s, 2s, and 3s. It's pretty even across the board. It's plug and play. But yeah, being able to utilize what you have, that was kind of the hallmark of Mike Leach, was it not? I mean, you didn't have all these excellent players. You might have a couple, 2, 3 guys that would step on the field, your quarterback and obviously your wide receiver at one point in time. But for the most part, you didn't have across the board the same kind of players, but you figured out a system and a way that you could operate and be successful for an extended period of time. I'll be interested to see whether that's the case with some of these other teams now that you are kind of saying, you know what, we're stepping to the forefront.
Because I don't know that it's possible for, you know, half of the league or more to be successful while, you know, coaching up their guys, right? Like, is there a scenario where Iowa State, Kansas State, you know, Oklahoma State, BYU, you know, et cetera, coach them up to the point where they're successful and have, you know, sustained success, and coaches get extensions and stuff, things like that? I don't think so. Like, and Kansas too. Like, they're not killing it in recruiting either. So something has to give, right? That is an unsustainable model, I think. You know, Mike Leach is a good example of it lasting for a while, and certainly, I mean, he was successful at Wazoo and at Mississippi State, and he was never an exceptionally strong recruiter. So maybe he's the exception that proves the rule. But either way, I'd love to just kind of fast forward 4 years and just take a peek.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah. See whether all this recruiting effort that you've put in over the course of the last couple of years really
because you're the first of the 16 teams in the conference starting next July. Texas Tech is the first to sign back-to-back top 25 classes since Arizona State did it in 2013 and 2014. Mm-hmm. Right? So, like, I think that kind of emphasizes the opportunity here.
Oh, yeah.
Because Oklahoma State will pop up here and there and have a top 25 class, and then they'll fall back to 35. And TCU, same thing, or Baylor. But if you can stack them, man, right? If you can sign another one next year.
Yeah. Yeah. That's building that depth we were talking about. I mean, that's really, you want to know the success of a college program, it's really based on the depth and what you can be able to plug and play there when the situation arises. All those programs that have had success over the course of the last 10, 15, 20 years have had so much depth. They've been able to plug and play. More Tech Talk next.
The podcast that finishes your workday in a very Red Raider way. This is the Tech Talk Podcast from Double T 97.3, presented by Cantex Roofing and Construction.
Hi, how are you? Good afternoon. It's Tech Talk on Double T 97.3 and Double T 97.3.com. Paul, I'm Aaron. Right now we have coverage of the First Responders Bowl on 100.7 The Score, featuring Texas State and Rice. Bobcats up 7-0 early in the game. Still about 10 minutes to go in the first quarter. So to kind of continue on this conversation about next year's Big 12, you said that you might vote for Arizona, and that's a good vote. That's what makes this coming season a bit more interesting to me because, you know, in this past summer, you could have just slotted all four of the newcomers on the bottom and felt okay about it, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
And as it turns out, that's more or less where they finished. You can't really do that here.
No, you
right?
can't.
I mean, Arizona State, I think you can comfortably fit bottom half.
Yeah, I think you can.
Kind of closer to the bottom than the midpoint. Colorado is an interesting. That really, to me, it really depends on how you feel about Prime.
Yeah, I think
more
it
than
really
anything
was.
else. But Arizona, and then to a lesser extent Utah. I mean, they probably deserve a spot in the top half. But where? I didn't realize this because I didn't pay just a ton of attention to Pac-12 football. But they replaced their starting quarterback in like September. Arizona did. Jaden DeLora, the transfer from Wazoo, he was pretty good last year for him, 2022. Yeah. Got hurt in September, never got his job back, and they've been starting a true freshman named, what is his name? He's like 5'9".
All right. Cheer for the little guy. Huh?
Yeah, Noah Fafita, Pac-12 Freshman of the Year this past year. 25 touchdowns, maybe like 5 interceptions in 8 games.
Wow. Nice ratio.
But, yeah, I mean, Arizona lists him at 5'11", but he's a tiny dude. And he's not like Kyler Murray in that he's not running around and crushing you with his legs. I think he might have negative rushing yards on the season. He is a pocket passer. I'll be curious to see how that works out in the Big 12.
Yeah. Well, I mean, you can kind of tell that the physicality elements that we've seen.
31 carries, 2 yards.
31 carries, 2 yards. Okay, so I mean, we're not going to expect him to set the world on fire on the ground. But I mean, yeah, physicalities. I mean, those are some of the things that I think you've seen out of, and I know you've seen more out of Coach DeRuyter's defense this last year. You've got some big guys coming back. I think you got some surprises in the bowl game, which you were like, wow. We've got some younger guys that just were hungry for that opportunity to show. Yeah, you got to keep them healthy. You add a little bit more depth to that, and you have through the portal. You'll probably add a little bit more. I'm excited about that, and I think that probably might put a little added pressure on somebody that they hadn't seen. I don't think you probably had a lot of defenses in the Pac-12 that were just got people quaking in their boots. Maybe outside of, you definitely didn't.
Not in Los Angeles.
No, not in Los Angeles. Maybe you did with the Huskies. That's probably about the closest thing you had to a decent defense, because Oregon really didn't kind of blow your mind. Most of the things that they did, especially when we saw it early on in the season this year, really didn't blow me away defensively. I think you, other than shooting yourself in the foot, that's really what you did in that game. You had every opportunity to win it, but their defense really didn't kind of blow me away as a dominant defense. So, yeah, that might be another opportunity for some of these defenses that have a little bit more oomph to them to flex their muscles.
Let's just make this the Arizona hour. Another element to the Wildcats, though, too, is they won 9 games, right? Mm-hmm. They went 9-3, and they'll play Oklahoma for a chance to win 10.
Yeah,
right. And they're an underdog in that game, but
sure.
I don't think by double digits. They won 9 games. They might win 10. There is going to be some expectations on the Wildcats next year, right?
I would think so.
Regionally, nationally, certainly locally, mm-hmm. right? They were picked 8th in the Pac-12 this past season, right? Like they're not that far removed from, I think, like a 20-plus game losing streak.
Yeah, it was bad.
How does this program handle expectations, right? And you could say the same thing about Tech, right? Clearly, you didn't handle expectations great.
No, you didn't.
Although I think it was less about approach and more about injuries, but we could have that conversation if you want. How does Arizona handle being preseason number 1 in the Big 12, or getting first place votes?
Yeah.
I mean, they'll certainly get first place votes.
Oh yeah, absolutely, they'll get first place votes.
That'll be interesting, because that's not a program football wise that is really used to that level of expectation.
Not in a long time have they had those kind of expectations. Basketball, absolutely. If they were not picked, not only at the top, along with UCLA at the top of the Pac-12, but they were perennial picked in the top 5 mm-hmm. in the country. So yeah, that's something and you expected that in baseball. So yeah, it really is football. Maybe that's it's been a foreign thing, at least in the last decade or so. But yeah, I will be interested to see kind of how they handle that expectation of being in the top half, coming in as an expectation of being in the top half of the Big 12.
Yeah, this is their second best season in the last 25 years. In 2014, they went 10-4. They lost in the Fiesta Bowl. They finished ranked in the top 20. So, yeah, interesting. More Tech Talk next.
It's every Red Raiders' favorite podcast. This is the Tech Talk Podcast from Double T 97.3, presented by Cantex Roofing and Construction.
Hi there. How you going? It's Tech Talk on Double T 97.3 and Double T 97.3.com with Paul. I'm Aaron. We'd love to hear your thoughts and comments on the Yates Flooring Center chat line at Double T 97.3.com. How's this for a stat? Texas State football this year, the first team in at least the last 25 years to both score 77 points in a game and also give up 77 points in a game.
That's crazy. That's a crazy stat. But yeah, wow. They're up 14-7 now on Rice, and I mean, with that kind of precedent set, who knows what this outcome will be at the end of this game.
Love to get your thoughts and comments on the Yates Flooring Center chat line at T973.com. Colorado, looking ahead to the next year too, is, I mean, their traditional recruiting class is terrible.
Yeah.
Right? Like, they signed Jordan Seaton, the number 1 overall offensive tackle in the class. He's a top 15 prospect in the country. That's good.
Yeah.
Right? That's awesome.
Oh, no doubt.
Good for them. They sound like 5 other guys.
Yeah. They don't have anybody else past that.
You can't build entirely through the portal. I think that this year and their season kind of proves that, or at least goes a long way toward proving that. And, you know, you can't churn half your roster year after year.
Yeah. Well, I mean, even
successful.
Even success from, let's just say, pre-portal, and we're looking at just JUCO guys like what Snyder built Kansas State out of. It took a while, but he was consistent. You still had him for 2 years going into that and buying into a philosophy and practicing with that philosophy and executing with that philosophy. And, you know, I mean, yeah, it was a big splash hiring Dion. You knew what you were going to get. You knew it was going to be a lot of show. You weren't sure what the substance was going to be beyond that. We found out real quick, you know, the win over TCU, and everybody was just, Dion's going to take over college football. Well, you know, TCU lost a ton of players off of that team that made it to the playoffs the year before. Lots of skill players, lots of leaders on that squad. And I think it showed throughout the year. I mean, they didn't have a great season, and there's a reason behind that. And everything else kind of panned out as well, because you saw that Colorado, you know, it was a struggle to get to 4 wins.
It really does feel like if you are interested in forming conclusions about teams or players, mostly teams, you should just not watch week 1 ever in college football.
No,
ever.
You don't learn anything.
Right? Like 2 years ago, Northwestern beat Nebraska, and then they didn't win another game.
Yeah.
You know, that game was in Ireland. And then, you know, when was that Texas Notre Dame game? It just, so many of those results are just meaningless. You know, and like, hell, look at Wyoming. Right? Hey, guys, that loss sucked, but that's a really good Wyoming team that's going to do a lot of damage, probably going to win the Mountain West, and I think they lost 4 games. You know,
Yeah. You don't know.
Yeah, 8-4.
You know, I mean, that, and I think it kind of goes back to those first few games. That's why you play a lot of those non-conference games, is to figure some things out. Who's going to be able to be dependable for you? Who's going to stay healthy for you? You know, you haven't had a healthy quarterback here in Lubbock, Texas for a full season since Patrick Mahomes was your starter. That's rough. That's rough. And that factors into it too.
Well,
but yeah,
and even then, healthy, air quotes, because it wasn't like he wasn't.
He was beat up. Yeah. I mean, we were talking about it during the break. That was a conversation I had with his mom his rookie year. I was over covering the Cowboys and the Chiefs in that game, and just chatting with her. And I said, "How's it going?" She said it was great because he's not playing and he gets a chance to get healthy, because he played that, especially that whole last season, just beat up. You are. And if you can somehow navigate through that, and they're not injuries that could end your career right then, or set your team back, you know, it's a grind, man. And we were talking about this too during the break, you know, going back to Arizona. You know, they're 9-3. Their 3 losses are all 1-possession losses. Their first loss was against Mississippi State. It was an overtime loss, 31-24. Their second loss was against Washington, 31-24 in regulation. And their third loss was 43-41 to USC in 3 overtimes. I mean, you legitimately could be looking at a team that was playing Texas in the playoffs. instead of Washington. I mean, that very well could have happened. So I guess that's probably a little bit of my optimism towards having them come into the Big 12 and have a level of success early on. But yeah, it really depends on if you're able to navigate those first few games without any kind of hitches, and really take whatever those first 2 games with a grain of salt, that they may not even factor into what happens in late October, early November.
So next year, Arizona, next year they play at Kansas State as a non-conference game.
Interesting.
Right?
Mm-hmm.
So their non-conference schedule next year is New Mexico, Northern Arizona, and then they're at Kansas State for a non-conference game. That's going to be tough. And then their away games are pretty manageable. They've got 5 home games, conference games, so not counting Kansas State. 5 home games: Arizona State, Colorado, Texas Tech, Houston, and West Virginia. Right? I mean, the Mountaineers were 8-4 this year. Tech Bowl game. But other than that, you've got an Arizona State team that was, I think, 3-9, not very good.
Mm-hmm.
You've got a Colorado team that was 4-8. And then you've got a Houston team that was terrible and got their coach fired.
Yeah.
And then on the road, Utah won't be easy.
No.
And I think UCF will be challenging. And certainly the distance plays a factor too.
That more than anything, I think. And weather was a huge factor in that Oklahoma State game. It was, if you watched it, it was the biggest sloppy mess you've probably ever seen in a football game, outside of an NFL game for that matter. But weather and distance will play a factor.
This has been the Tech Talk Podcast, presented by Cantex Roofing and Construction. Check out our library of Double T 97.3 podcasts at doublet97.3.com.